Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Oscar season is underway, and here on the podcast, I'm hosting panels of film industry professionals to discuss the nominees in their category of expertise. This is episode 2 of a planned 13, and we're talking about sound. Let me introduce my guests. Steve Morrow, you've been a production sound mixer for over 30 years, and your credits include La La Land, A Star is Born, and Ford vs. Ferrari. Nice to see you again.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And making his Below the Line debut is Erik Aadahl. Erik, you've been a sound editor for more than 25 years, and your credits include 2 Quiet Place movies, a number of Godzilla films, and a sonic spectacle of Transformer movies. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
Now, throughout this Oscar season, I want to recognize the horrible tragedy of the LA wildfires, both the immediate challenges and the long-term impact this devastation will have on the LA-based filming. To all our industry colleagues, we see you. Okay, off to the races. The 5 2024 films nominated for sound are A Complete Unknown, Dune Part 2, Emilia Pèrez, Wicked, and The Wild Robot. We're going to discuss them in that order, and spoilers are possible, so consider this a warning. As a side note, we like to recognize our below-the-line compatriots by name, even if it means an occasional mispronunciation. Steve and Erik, you are welcome to correct me.
All right.
Okay, first up, A Complete Unknown. Sound team Todd A. Maitland, Donald Sylvester, Ted Kaplan, Paul Massey, and David Gianmarco, thanks. See, right out the gate. Glad you're here, Erik. You're making an impact right away.
I know, David.
Steve always lets it go without saying anything. Also worth noting, friend of the show, Don Sylvester, has made a lot of these appearances, did not want to come on this episode, a little uncomfortable talking about his own work compared to the others. You guys are welcome, though, to tell him what you think.
He just didn't want to be trashed in person. That's all. It's always hard to defend yourself.
Yeah.
The movie sounds great. I mean, this year we have 5. Obviously every year we have 5 nominees. 3 of them are music movies, musicals, music-based movies. Mm-hmm. We have a robot, and we have a big worm. So, yeah, no, I mean, A Complete Unknown is what struck me is the world that Don and his team created in the sense of what era it was in, what decade we're living in. And that's what really kind of hit me right off the bat starting to watch it. You just really heard New York, and you really heard the hustle and bustle of the city. And also I have to say it's a difficult, watching the movie, I just he's strumming the guitar nonstop through a lot of these scenes, and it's just like, how are they able to get that clean? Are they able to separate it later? Like the sound of it's very authentic and very, it feels real. And that's a difficult thing to do. And then also your lead actor is sometimes shirtless in a giant wide shot, and you're like, woof, boy, that's not an easy sound thing to do. It was an impressive feat, story-wise, to kind of give you that, year and a half of his life, the drama behind going electric guitar or acoustic, in that festival. So I felt it was well done, and it looked great, sounded great.
I would agree. Sound brings so much to the cinematic experience, and especially putting the audience into that time and place. And like Steve said, the gritty realism of New York in that period really stood out to me, like the vintage vehicles and the people on the street and the crowds. And then as we transition into these music numbers, that felt so real. It didn't feel canned, like studio produced. A lot of musicals do pre-records, and then everyone's just like lip syncing along to that. This definitely wasn't that. This was live, and not just live vocals, but the band was actually playing. And from what I understand, Todd Maitland was like capturing all that on set while extras and crowds are making noise. And I think Steve knows better than I do how challenging shooting under those conditions is when you're trying to capture production audio on set, and you have not just live vocals, but live instruments playing. You've got the crowd going. Apparently, from what I've heard, they were not miming, is often what you do. It was just kind of a raucous, real cacophony, which, the benefit of that is it puts the actors in that reality and it just feeds into itself and creates that reality on set. The challenge sound wise is you've got all of this stuff that's bleeding into each other. So Steve knows better than I do how hard that is. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be very careful in miking it appropriately. If you have 25 people talking and there's one microphone, you're kind of stuck. In post-production, there's nothing they can do. So you have to be very careful. I think I heard Todd Maitland say 50 channels of audio for some of these scenes, which
Mhm.
makes sense because, you'd have a ton of instrument channels, and then you'd have a bunch of background, for the crowds, and then you'd have the actors, all of the actors mic'd up. And so the key goal on all of those is you mic it up as much as you can so that you are giving an avalanche of information to post production. But without that, all that bleeding on all the mics, if you don't have enough of them out there to capture it, it's just going to sound wrong. I mean, we've all heard, when somebody's off mic and it just doesn't sound right. That's times that by 50. If you're not doing it right. I also heard that Mangold wanted to put his cast in that era and would ask Todd to play sound effects of, the riots outside and the street noise and just all sorts of things to really get the actors in the mood of it, or in the, just living in that world. And that's also a tough thing because there's a delicate balance. Are you trapping post production into having to re-record everything, or are you giving them just enough where it's, not an issue? That all in that, is just a huge challenge on that film sound wise on the production side. And then you pass it over to post and say, hey, here's 50 channels of kind of chaotic stuff. Good luck finding it. You'll find it. Here it is. But it's just a ton of work. And I think that's where this movie really succeeds, because when you're watching it, none of those things are popping in your head. You're not like, oh, I wonder how they did that, or, oh, that sounds like playback. You're watching it almost documentary style, where you're just kind of watching it like, oh, this is what's happening. And I think that really serves, for one, the all of us watching the movie and enjoying it, and then also it helps the actors stay in character, helps the director know what he's getting, if he's getting it. All of those things are super helpful. And that's the challenge of those kind of movies, where you're just it's a lot. You're heavy lifting a lot of work, whereas a regular film where people are talking, it's, I just got off a film where it was like two or three people talking. That was the most we ever had in any scene. And it was like, whew, I don't remember how to do this. There's only two people in the scene.
Yeah, walk
you
in the
know?
park.
Yeah, every once in a while I'd be like, why do I have six microphones out there? There's only two people here. But it's, sometimes you just have to do what you can. So congrats on their success for sure.
Yeah, agreed.
I wanted to ask you guys about the guitars and sort of the challenge from a production and post production perspective. And I'm actually reminded, Steve, of when we talked about Ford versus Ferrari and how the cars on set were not going to sound necessarily like the cars that people needed to hear in the actual movie. I'm curious if that would also be an issue with these guitars, which what people are used to hearing maybe is recorded in a studio versus what they think it's going to sound like live. And if there are differences that these sides would have to coordinate and kind of discuss how that sound is going to come together.
I think we're all used to hearing the difference between like a studio recording and then the live album version, right? And what really helps that is the visual. I always tell, when we're on scouts trying to find locations for movies, they'll pick a spot right next to the freeway, and you're just like, okay, are we going to see the freeway? And if the answer is yes, we see the freeway, then the audience will accept the noise of the freeway. If we don't see the freeway, the audience is going to wonder, what is that noise? And then you're going to have to re-record the dialogue, because it just won't make sense to the audience. And I think that's the same thing here, where we're all used to listening to, still captured guitars, but since we're watching a movie and it's in an open air space, it can sound looser. Doesn't have to sound polished. And in fact, if it did sound polished, there'd be a mistake there, and we would all wonder why it sounds so crystal clear. I think so. For my opinion, is the more real you can make it in the environment, the better it serves the movie. And then you can get away with a lot more. Like I said, if you're next to the freeway and you see it, it's not a problem to hear it.
Well, Eric, would you be of the opinion that since Todd did so much work on set, Don's job was actually really easy in post production then because they'd gotten all the good sound already, and so it's just a matter of laying it out like a puzzle or what?
Yeah, just picking what channel to put it in.
Well, no, I think it could actually be the opposite. It's a lot, as Steve mentioned, there's a lot more material to sift through and a lot more choices you have to make. And I would add that it's not just Don's challenge, it's the music editor's challenge. And then in dialogue department's challenge, how do you transition from what the music department is editing into then dialogue in and out of those scenes? They need to feel seamless and smooth. So, I wouldn't say it's makes it easier at all.
Oh no, it's 10 times harder. Yeah. Especially when you're going from dialogue to singing, because sometimes the music department will really slick up the vocals and then it sounds bizarrely different than their voice that they were just saying in the same scene. So everybody has to coordinate that. Otherwise,
I would no 100%. And I would just add that, this is an interesting year. Like Steve mentioned, we have three of the movies are music driven films. I might be wrong, but as far as I know, this might be the first year in the Oscars where you have music editors represented on those three films as well in the sound category, which is kind of historic. So interesting year, and from that perspective.
Eric, good response. I was trying to get you to trash Don on there, but given as how he recommended you to us, he might not have appreciated that. So you handled it with aplomb.
Don and I go way back, like to when I first started feature films. So yeah, back when 20th Century Fox existed.
I've heard of that studio once before in the history books.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll take us into our second film, one of our non-musical selections. That'd be Dune Part 2. And the sound team is Gareth John, Richard King, Ron Bartlett, and Doug Hemphill.
On the production side, you're going to have sand and everything. Everything. There won't be ever forget that you were doing a sand movie until you sold all your equipment.
You bring air compressors and
it's just like, yeah, the budget on the canned air was higher than craft service. So no, it's that's a tough movie. From what I understand from Gareth, production mixer, is he hardlined everything. The way that Denny, the director, directs is he does one camera, which is kind of a sound dream because a lot of the time, you have a like the film that Eric and I did, which was Joker 2 or Joker Folie à Deux. There was 6, 7, 8 cameras at a time, and we were doing vocals and music and all this stuff, but everybody had to be radio mic'd because you couldn't. There's a wide camera somewhere, even if there's a tight camera on the actors. So the benefit of doing one camera at a time is you get to kind of play with the sound on production where you could be really tight on a close-up and wider on the wide shots, and it just makes more sense matching wise as opposed to two cameras, one wide, one tight, and all of a sudden the wide sounds too tight or the tight sounds too wide. That's the trade-off. So from what I understand, they were able to do a lot of booming and a lot of hardline, booms, which a lot of the time now we're just everything is wireless because it's just quicker and faster and easier. And sometimes you just don't have the luxury of time and planning. So that movie, I remember coming out of the theater thinking, how did they do any of it? It's such it was by the way, one of my favorite movies of the year, but I just remember coming out of the theater going, that's it. That's it. That's the standard of which all these big sci-fi movies, live up to now. Because if you do something less than that, it's kind of like, all right, whatever. I'm sure that's how it felt when Star Wars came out. It was like, holy cow, there's this movie that actually treats sci-fi like a real thing versus just a corny, cheesy, experiment. So what they were able to accomplish, bringing that world of Arrakis to life and bringing the whole story around is incredible.
100% agree. And as a lifelong sci-fi fan, I was very excited for the first one, and then again this one. I started reading Frank Herbert when I was 13, and probably read all of those books multiple times. And one of the challenges with a film like this is Arrakis doesn't exist. None of this stuff exists. The language of the Fremen, Herbert had written sort of a glossary of terms, but you're inventing so much of these things. You're inventing this language and this whole world from scratch. As a sound designer, I was very impressed with the realism and the groundedness of this totally make-believe fictional universe. And I thought there's some really nice choices. I love scenes when sound design is a story point. And there's a great sequence in Dune 2 where they put a thumper down and they're calling out Shai Hulud for Paul Muad'Dib to prove himself. And the biggest sandworm they've seen shows up and he rides it. And the whole sequence starts very quiet, just the sound of the thumper, which sends this sound vibration into the sand dunes to attract the worm. And that's kind of the only sound, this rhythm going. And then the earth starts to rumble, and you feel sort of the scale and the power because not just because of the visuals, I think half of it is because of the sound design, which creates this sort of feeling of a force of nature approaching. And it's all done without music until he finally gets on that sandworm. Everyone realizes he's survived. And then Hans Zimmer's score brings the emotion and sort of the epic sweep into it. So just really, beautifully constructed. And, whenever you're dealing with those kind of scenes, it's so easy for it to become a mess, a cacophony. But it stayed big and powerful, but also very precise and simple but bold, which is kind of my favorite approach to filmmaking.
Yeah, and it's just so fun. I mean, like you were saying at the beginning of that, it's so quiet. And in fact, when Chalamet is, pounding on the sand to try to figure out where to put it, the sound is letting him know, hey, this is not the right spot. You got to go lower. And even,
Yeah.
Zendaya's character's like, lower, lower, and those are the things that it's like, and I'm sure there's a temptation to go completely wild with it, but it was subtle enough, but the audience understood it as well. Like we all understand
Yeah.
it, like that sound that he was pounding his fist into the ground wasn't right because we'd heard it before. And then you're creating, like you said, a whole different world of, just every time somebody uses their suit that makes them anti-gravity a little bit, it's just a sound that is turned on, turned off, and it's like, yeah, I mean, those are things that just bring it to life, that you understand, story-wise what's happening. And I would say, to be honest, like, obviously we do sound for a living. I would say if you mute that moment in the movie, it's more than 50% of the movie is the sound in that moment. Because any audience member is going to watch that movie. If you mute it,
It's not the same.
you're just losing the entire experience. Yeah. Whereas if you close your eyes and listen to it, your experience still holds up in that moment. I mean, it's
Hmm.
certainly the visuals are incredible, but you can still understand what the story is and what's happening with just the sound playing. It's beautiful, beautiful work. And man, it must have been hot. And it must have been difficult for the crew to walk around on sand dunes without creating footprints.
Yeah.
You ever work on a beach with the crew and the director's lining up a shot and some big crew member walks through and they're like, stop, stop, stop. And it's just like total panic. Well, imagine that being the entire movie experience. I can only imagine how many times that they had to rake the sand and blow it a little bit to keep it nice and smooth. It must have been brutal. Just brutal. And by the way, sound equipment does not do well in the heat, like computers and sound.
Oh wow.
I was on a show where it was 116 degrees out in New Mexico, and the sound recorder, I had two of them. One of them shut off, said overheating, shutting down in 10 seconds. And then I looked at the other machine, it was still going. We were still rolling. I was like, okay, well, I got one left. And then we cut, I hit stop, and then it said shutting down, overheating. And I was like, sorry, guys, I need an air conditioner over here. Yeah, because it's just equipment, just put it in the oven and see how long it lasts. Not very long.
This is also a movie that makes its case for seeing it in the theater, where sound is a big part of that experience that in person. Now, and again, we've established before, I'm sure you guys have great sound systems at home, but I think watching on my TV without the benefits of theater wide speakers, it's not the same experience for a film like this.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Not at all. Even, home Atmos, even if people have that, it's not the same as theatrical Atmos. It's a much condensed version. And that's sort of the best scenario. Most people might be just watching two channel out of their screen. And, these films were mixed in Dolby Atmos. So that is the gold standard, the filmmaker's version. And if you're not hearing it in the best theater, then you're not really hearing what the intent was. A movie like Dune is absolutely a reason for people to go to a theater and hear the movie as intended and not hear 10 pounds packed into a 1 pound bag, which is basically what a 2-track is. You're taking, dozens of channels from the ceiling and all around you and like boiling it all down to just 2 tracks.
How many tracks is a theatrical Atmos mix, generally speaking?
I always think in terms of objects, but I think we're about typically 64 channels in an Atmos mix.
Right. So at home, you're talking maybe 9
Yeah.
or 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even if it's the best system, it's maybe 11, right? 9.2 or whatever you can do at home. But
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, go to the theater.
Well, this was also one of my favorite movies of the year. I'm hopeful that Villeneuve not being nominated as director doesn't mean that he's going to put off doing Dune Messiah, because I'm very excited to see a third chapter in this story as well, even if it's going to be many years before it happens, but fingers crossed.
It's always such a hard thing. There's 10 best movies and 5 directors. It's like, oh, how do you have a best movie without a director? But okay. Yeah. Every year somebody gets snubbed because there's 10 best movies.
Yep.
Well, the third film on our list, this director did get nominated, I believe, for Emilia Pèrez. Erik, you did so good with the names from Dune. Maybe you want to take a crack at these. The sound team, Erwan Kerzanit, Emmerich de Voldier, Maxence Dussier, Cyril Holtz, and Niels Barletta. How'd I do? Close? Would they come up to stage if I called those names?
Well, je parle peu de français, mais I do speak some French, but I'm afraid I would mangle it as well. So apologies to our French sound team.
What should people be listening for with Emilia Pèrez?
Again, this is a full-on musical. It's kind of the musical style of, maybe I would call it hyper expressive. So in a way that, where a complete unknown was very gridded and grounded and realistic. This is more of kind of almost a fantasy version of a musical in a way, though there are kind of real world elements that weave in and out, but it's done in a much more kind of hyper real kind of way. One of the things that I found really interesting was how the film, there's many details that kind of just are almost like sound design that's almost musical as well, and rhythmic, like with the crowd movements. And we cut to an overhead shot in this ballroom, and the chandelier is vibrating from the energy of the emotional undercurrent of the scene. And that's why I'm kind of using the term hyper expressive. And the way we transition into and out of music was also very hyper expressive, where we'll go really big, like the gunfight, for example. It's played very real. Perspectives on the weapons from the interiors to the exteriors, really putting you into the reality of it. And then we go totally conceptual and drop all of the reality sounds out. And we just go into a headspace kind of tone, which to me just kind of evoked this really interesting, evocative feeling of tragedy. And then that kind of like builds, and boom, Emilia has this huge gasp. We think she's dead, but then she wakes up and this huge breath just switches everything again. And those kind of transitions, in a way, like can really pull an audience in. And I thought that this movie was very effective in doing that. One other thing I thought was interesting is the singing vocals felt very, very clean and clear. I found it really interesting, though, in the mix that they would really play perspectives. So if camera is pushing in hard on Zoe Saldana's face, you'd hear that perspective where suddenly her vocals are in your face and then they back off as the camera pulls out. I liked that feeling of kind of motion and movement in the sound mix.
They also did an interesting thing that I thought with the vocals as well, because it. So I went to a couple of I went to like a show and tell that they had for this film up at the Ross House. It was interesting to listen to them. They would practice and pre-record, and then they would later on go and re-record the vocals. So this is a situation where it's not necessarily live on set. Some pieces are, but for the most part, it's a lot of re-recording of the vocals in a studio later, which I thought was interesting because they would basically they're performing on set, then later on correcting the performance, with almost with a loop. But the interesting thing they did with the mix, which is a huge decision, is anytime they would move their character's head back or forth, you would lose some of the perspective of the singing, which, if you're on set and you're just holding a microphone over the actors and they move away from it and you're not with them, that's how you lose that. But, clearly they did it as a choice, which I think is also, represents when the camera moves in and it's much louder in your face. And that's just one of those things that I think, humans we're, if you really listen to somebody when they start moving their head around, or I'm sure you've been walking and somebody's talking in front of you, throwing it the wrong direction, you can't hear them. And you're like, what did you say? Like, I just can't hear you. You're talking away from me. Those are those things that you don't, in most movies, you want to hear the dialogue no matter where they are, and you don't really want it to be super perspective-y. But in this movie, they made that choice to do that, which I thought was really interesting. Something that I wouldn't have expected, because when I was watching it, I thought, oh, they must have recorded this live, and she's just turning her head left and right, and good luck with the boom or the lav or whatever. But no, then they said no, we re-recorded that, and that was a choice, and I thought that was very interesting. Also, the movie, from what they told me, that the entire movie was shot on stage, even the exterior streets. That first song that Zoe, is it Zoe?
Saldana?
Yeah, Zoe Saldana. The first song that she sings, where she's on her computer and the whole background, and it's at night, she comes out of the liquor store or whatever. That's all on a stage. They said the entire movie was on stage except for a couple exteriors where they're obviously driving cars through the desert or whatever. And I thought, well, that's even more. You're basically creating that whole environment when she goes in and out of the store with backgrounds, and you're starting off with a nice quiet soundstage or a nice warehouse in France. I'm not sure what they have, but I assume it's something quiet enough. And yeah, you have to kind of recreate that whole world to give it life, which is not an easy task. Because that's what we, on production side, we want it as quiet as possible, as clean as possible, and then you hand it over to post and let them make it as loud as they can, unless you're making some sort of movie on the street. So yeah, it was an impressive feat to do what they did, and also just the choreography between like when they're loading the guns for that scene. It's like a real specific action. It's a very musical
Yeah.
movie in that sense, and those are all choices that are difficult to do on set, without a lot of preparation and practice and effort. And I really give it to them with they were able to pull a lot of that off, which was really great.
I like that you mentioned that because it kind of reminds me of Baby Driver, if you remember that
Yeah, I was
movie.
thinking the same thing.
Yeah, where these rhythms, the sound rhythms of sound effects are syncopated with music and pre-planned. So, actors on set can be following those rhythms. And I think the picture editing very much lent itself to that too, using the sound and music rhythms in a strong way to find the cut.
Yeah, and those things are hard to do. I mean, like in the case of Baby Driver, I remember watching and going, "How did they come up with it?" But you're just creating a beat and they're sticking to it, and then your music team and post and the editors and everybody has to follow along with that, or else it makes complete no sense. But well done. Yeah, they did a great job.
It's interesting to me that this movie also has two musical performances nominated for original song. Now, that Oscar category will get its own episode here on the podcast, but I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about how the achievement in sound, which we've been discussing, might have helped elevate those songs.
It's one of those things where I think everything has to work or else nothing works. You know, and when you're getting to the best anything category, if there's something that's not working with other things, then the whole film's, in jeopardy in that. So yeah, I mean, I think everything plays a part of it because otherwise you're not connecting with the audience. That's really who's picking you're not just randomly picking best song out of thin air, but you're attributing it to a film. So in my mind, it all plays a part of it.
Absolutely. And down to sort of the visual orchestration and the visual kinetics and how that's cut together to this piece of music and how the performances are affected by the music and vice versa, and how the sound design kind of syncopates with the music and pulls the audience into the reality of the scene and out of it. Like you said, Steve, it's a holistic thing, and it's hard to separate sometimes. Like for our sound category, if it was a terrible mix, it's very possible that those songs would not have gotten nominated. So it all has to work in syncopation. It all needs to work holistically together.
Well, all those things working together is also a very clear requirement of our next film, Wicked. Sound team Simon Hayes, Nancy Nugent Title, Jack Dolman, Andy Nelson, and John Marquis.
Marquis.
And John Marquis.
Yes.
Nailed it. Well, this is it's the third musical of the category, and all the vocals were sung live. Simon's great at recording all that, live vocals, which is not easy. And the sets were massive and outdoors, and, so there was a lot to deal with. I'm sure there were plenty of planes flying over and things of that nature, right on the perfect, note, which would drive you crazy. But yeah, no, they did, from what I understand, even when she's flying and flipping in the air, all these things are sung live, which is just like an incredible effort and an incredible achievement to be able to get all that. Also, Simon has this thing which is interesting. He definitely production allows him the time to do some of these things, and a lot of it is discussions and pre-production. But he has, he's created a silent air from the effects team, which is basically a big padded box, 200 feet that way with a tube attached to it, and inside the box is the fan. And by the time it comes to the end of the tube, it's pretty quiet. It's just the wind that comes out of the tube, as opposed to having the fan right on set and blowing and making noise. And so, he's able to ask and prepare for all these things that will really help out, recording these vocals live and making sure you're getting that performance, as authentically as you can on a set. So I give them a huge amount of, props in the amount of difficulty it is to get that, especially when you have, if you look at a lot of these musical numbers, there's a ton of background people, and there's no carpets in this, the rooms are not carpeted. So it is a noisy, bouncy, echoey space, these sets. And so you have to do a lot of, covering shoes and making things quiet and really just getting everybody to participate on a film set, because there's always noise happening. There's always somebody dropping a pipe right on the right time, or the wrong time. And you're just, pulling your hair out. But if you can get everybody on board, you're able to achieve a lot of really great, performances that were captured, on camera.
Yeah, and from what I understand, Simon had at least 3 or 4 lavs wireless mics on the vocalists while they were going, and that's also a lot of things to sort out later and edit and make choices.
It's also a lot to ask of your cast. Hey, can we
And a
throw a
lot
bunch of,
oh yeah.
But once they get it, they get it.
Yeah, yeah. But to me, the standout thing about that movie was how great the vocals sounded. Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, you got every little intimate nuance of their performance with their singing. And if you had ADR'd that or pre-recorded it, it would be a totally different experience.
Oh yeah, you wouldn't be in that movie. I mean, even Ariana Grande, just even her little It's just the little noises that she makes is hysterical. I mean, I was
Totally.
dying.
So funny. And that brings up for me, one thing I loved was sort of the whimsy of the sound design. So, her character, Glinda, every little time she swoops her hair, you hear this little sweep, swoosh, squish, and that was kind of like her motif. And so that's the sort of sound design heightening, her character and having fun with it in a very sort of musical, whimsical, playful way. Yeah, and then a lot of the music numbers, you again have the rhythmic sort of crowd dancing syncopated with the music, which all of which has to be completely designed and, created in post. Yeah, really, really fun use of rhythmic musical sound design.
I thought it was fun that the sound design really was a lot of the percussion in the music. When you're watching the picture, it all syncs up wonderfully with the music itself. And if it was just the music track, I think, yeah, obviously it's a whole different movie, but the juggling of those two things without it being overwhelming was incredible.
Yeah, and I thought it was a elegant mix. Like there was just nice dynamics, and Andy Nelson is very well known
Oh, he's
for
great. Yeah.
musicals and but he gives the track a lot of space too. He's not just trying to like, oh, I'm the most important thing here on the mix board, so I'm going to turn all my stuff up. He doesn't really think that way. He gives air and space, which to me is, elegant and yeah, really, really worked beautifully.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely, our category is definitely not best loudest movie, right? It's
Yeah.
just the best sound, and so like sometimes the lack of sound is the best sound, and it's just the feeling that you can bring to the audience and what the director, emotionally feels in those moments and what he wants you to feel, and those are all important things, and they do that really well with this film.
I do have to confess, I'm a little embarrassed when it comes to the names that I messed up Nancy or John's pronunciation because actually both of them were guests on the podcast a few years ago talking about the Flash. And so if you're hearing this, I'm really sorry, guys. Really sorry about
Just so you guys know, he's been drinking on off camera a little bit, so that's the reason.
In between each question, there we're doing shots.
Yeah, that's why we keep talking longer and longer without any questions because we're getting worried about the guy.
that. It's very stressful getting all these episodes together. So I wish everybody would be a little patient. All right. The fifth film on our list is The Wild Robot. Randy Tom, Brad Chumney, Gary A. Rizzo, and Lefferts is the sound team.
So on the production side, this is a tough movie for me because I don't. It's an animated film, which there's there's obviously actors acting and things like that, but you are creating an entire movie from scratch. A lot of the time, what the production side does is we're laying down the foundation in the editing room. They edit it, and the director starts to enjoy certain ideas. Like, oh, we're on a busy street. There's some noise there. And so then later on, when you're putting in the noise of the busy street, it makes sense because the director's kind of already getting into that vibe. Or it's in an office, and so now you want to hear some things in the office. So that's what the production side does. It kind of we're laying the foundation for what post production is going to build on top of that. Well, in an animated film, you don't have any of that. You're starting from zero. So, to a certain level, it's a very impressive movie because it brings you into this world instantly, and it has to charm you right off the bat because the sound is going to be, a lot of that movie, especially with, the different characters and the different animals at the beginning, especially in the first 10 minutes where there's just not much, there's no dialogue going on other than the robot trying to get somebody to to be its owner. Um, so it's impressive, I mean, all to me, all animated movies are so impressive because you're building from scratch, which has got to be one, super fun, or two, terrifying, because there's nothing that's, you're not hiding behind something, that's already been laid down by a different team or, so yeah, I mean, Eric would know better on this film than I would, but I would just say, it was enjoyable and I really liked that. I love the sound of the movie, and it's an impressive feat to just know that they started with nothing.
Yeah, yeah, animation's a total blank canvas. And which is why I love working on animation. You can build it from scratch. And I think you also have more license than maybe in a live action film. You can be a little bit more playful, I think. But what I was really impressed with was my overall emotional reaction to not just this soundtrack, but the overall movie. I found myself crying, and this is the magic of cinema. And sound is, like we said, is half the cinematic experience and pulls you into this story. And when you can evoke a genuine emotional reaction, you've succeeded. And I think The Wild Robot truly did succeed. You have no humans in it. You start with this robot who has one purpose, which is to be delivered to whoever bought it. But none of those people are around because it's crash landed into this new environment. And Randy Tom is, I always enjoy hearing what he does with sort of animal vocals. And there's just a really fun playfulness with, the sea otters that we're introduced with. Before the robot learns to translate their language and we start hearing English, we're hearing, these little playful animal sounds. And I don't care if they're not necessarily realistic. The point is sort of what the story you're telling and the emotions you're trying to evoke. And ultimately, when this robot meets this little baby chick and starts to nurture it, the best kind of sound design is when you can do an emotional performance with characters. And it's a real delicate tightrope because you can go into cheesy land and now you've turned off your audience. So much of it is just having an honesty in your sound design performances and restraint. That I think was my kind of biggest takeaway from this was just being totally swept away in this story, and it worked emotionally, it worked dramatically. You have big moments like the bear attack or the tsunami, where we're going full tilt, danger. But then we were getting very, very intimate and quiet. We were talking about sound dynamics earlier, and this movie to me is a great example of not just the peaks, but the valleys. And it's those valleys that pull the audience in, and it allows the audience to have space to feel something. Because if you're full tilt the whole time, it can be a barrage and you can push the audience away emotionally. You can tire them out. It becomes a plateau, which is boring. So I think when you can have, the peaks and the valleys, the highs and the low, the negative space, and create genuine intimacy, that's our job.
Yeah, and
So
they did it so well in this,
yeah.
they also did that thing where they really balanced the music and the effects really well in a lot of these pieces where they kind of commingle together, like what part is music, what part is effects. They're both very well done together in that. I really enjoy those moments where you just go, okay, that's cool, like because the picture is matching the music and music is matching the effects, and yeah, it's a fun journey to be on that movie.
Yeah.
It's very charming.
Now, I'm curious. I don't remember the last time that an animated film was nominated in the sound category.
I think it was two or 3 years ago. It was the Elements movie where it was like the fire and the water. Am I wrong?
Elemental. Um,
Elemental was that?
I don't think so. Certainly Wally, but there might be something more recent.
My question for you guys is: are you surprised to see it on here, or this again? You talk about this. There's no question about the skill that went into this, but for an animated film to break out, is The Wild Robot specifically next level, or it just came together well for this film? You think, as far as the whole Oscar process goes?
I mean, I think it's an ace level of execution on the sound. If the film wasn't so well critically received, and did pack such an emotional wallop, then it probably wouldn't have been nominated. honestly. I mean, there's a lot of great work that never gets recognized out there just because of whatever it is, preconceived notions, or, if it's not being considered for best animated film or best picture, a lot of the gold nuggets just kind of get ignored for reasons that have nothing to do with sound and how the sound is executed. This is a nice, what's the right word? It's a good nexus of all different things, from, a high quality emotional movie that did really well in theaters, did really well with critics, and was a beautifully artistically executed sound job. I think it's up for music as well. Chris Bowers, I think, is up for that. So, it's everybody, it takes a village. So,
Yeah, it's that thing. It's like there was something wrong somewhere down the chain, then the whole thing kind of falls apart. I think the last, let's see, from what my list has, is Isle of Dogs was the last.
oh, okay.
That was 2020, I
Mm.
believe. So, and before that, it was How to Train Your Dragon, which was 9 years earlier. So there's been a few. There's been maybe half a dozen in the last 20 years. So it's not very often that it happens, but it's not impossible.
It used to be more common, like in the Pixar films of old, like Toy Story and Bug's Life, and
Did they get best mix and sound editing when there were two different categories, or was it always split? Because I would understand like the sound editing category, it would because you are
yeah,
starting from scratch there.
I don't quite remember. I mean, Toy Story is Gary Rydstrom did both,
Right. Yeah.
sound design and mixing. So yeah,
Yeah. That's a little homework for your listeners. Comment below.
yeah, please.
We read all the comments.
Well, Erik, when you mentioned earlier about gold standard work that doesn't get recognized, that's actually a really good segue to our next segment. It's almost like you've done this before, Erik. Even no one would guess that it was your first time on the show. What other 2024 films would either of you like to call out for achievement in sound?
Well, speaking of animated films, there's this beautiful film called Flow,
Mm-hmm.
which has no dialogue at all, but it works. It is so compelling. It pulls you right in. And again, you have, for people who don't know, the story is it's about this big flood, and a cat can't escape the flood and has to sort of jump into a boat that's floating along and following the flow. And as the story goes on, different creatures kind of join this little arc, you can call it, and they communicate, but not with English, not with talking. They communicate as animals do, with, you know, grunts and yawns and squeals and meows and
And all the animals were real recorded. I mean, there was no, I mean not live recorded, but like they're all real animal
it's
sounds.
real animals.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
except for one of them, which because it was just too weird. But
yeah, but again, the sound is such a central part. I mean, you're basically from scratch doing a performance. You're acting. You are creating behavior and painting a picture of the internal souls of these characters out of scratch. So it's incredible sound design, but it's almost like acting, and those animal sounds are not going to be nominated for an acting category, but they almost deserve to be because it's so central to sort of the emotion of the film. And again, it packs a total wallop emotionally. Flow is maybe one that, deserved to be. There's many who deserve to be recognized. I love the substance that
oh man, that was such a visceral sounding movie with the.
yeah,
I mean, it was just so much. It was almost overwhelming. The sound design.
it gave me stress. Like
Yeah.
it
Oh, it
really
stressed me out.
evoked a very stressful reaction in me in a good way.
Yeah, as it should. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the whole point. And I think the picture editing helped a lot with sort of the how expressive the sound could be. You cut into an extreme close up of Dennis Quaid blowing smoke, and it's a really hyper real kind of rhythmic beat that adds to sort of this basically the sound is helping tell the story of the internal emotional state of our main character, played by Demi Moore. So it's that was another one that I'd encourage people, if they haven't, to go listen to it.
Yeah. It was a fun year of movies this year, for sure. There's a lot of interesting films out there.
Anything else you want to call out specifically, Steve?
Eric and I did a movie, Joker, Folie à Deux. I thought that sounded pretty damn great. And then I also did a movie Saturday night, which was 90 minutes leading up to the first broadcast of SNL. That is a movie that is wall to wall chaos and sound. And Jason does give the audience a few moments of quiet, to rest the audience's ears and emotions. But yeah, that's a movie where it's just nonstop dialogue, nonstop. Guys, there was 30, 40, 50 actors all talking all at once. It was insane.
That was beautifully done. Like, I can only imagine what that was like. And all these single shots, just
Yeah.
moving through different conversations. And I mean, what a logistic challenge on the production end. And I would have mentioned Joker Folie à Deux too, but I'm obviously biased. But
Yeah,
that's one of my favorite tracks I've ever worked on.
me too. Actually,
yeah.
me too. I mean, we had such a good time making that movie, and Gaga and Joaquin were just incredible on set, and it's just so fun to watch them perform and sing and just be in that world for the months and months that we were. What a great gift it was.
Yeah, we always called it a unicorn when we were working on it in post. Yep. Like, just one of a kind experience.
Well, I'm going to take that as a commitment for you guys to come back and talk about it here on the show. Once we get through all this Oscar business, put it on your calendars, guys. We'll get you back.
Yep, you got it.
All right.
This was a lot of fun. On that note, we'll call it a wrap. Great having you guys here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's been fun.
This is the second of 13 Oscar episodes. I hope you'll stick with us. The plan is a new episode every 3 days until the ceremony on March 2nd, so subscribe now if you haven't already so you catch them all. As always, I appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info on our website, belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. To all of our listeners, I appreciate you. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.